My name is Bridget Kane. I am 42 years old, a former senior logistics officer in the United States Air Force. I learned to make decisions when the ground shook, to count seconds by breath, and to keep my voice level when other people's voices climbed walls. On my wedding day, I wanted none of that. I wanted music, white peonies, and the quiet kind of joy you only recognize after years of noise. The quartet tuned a final A. The aisle smelled like cut gardenias and rain on stone. Daniel squeezed my fingers once, that small signal we used whenever words would only get in the way. I was about to speak my vows when heels struck tile, sharp, ringing, final. My sister, Mallister, stepped into the aisle with her chin set and her jaw hard. "Arrest him! He's a fake!" she shouted at the officiant, at the guests, at me. For a second, the room forgot how to breathe. 2 soldiers in green berets moved from the doorway, followed by 2 uniformed military police with black belts and polished boots. The word moved faster than the men did. Arrest. Someone gasped. Someone filmed. Someone whispered Daniel's last name like it might break if spoken too loudly. The MPs took Daniel by the wrists. Metal kissed bone. The sound was bright and humiliating. He didn't fight. His eyes found mine, steady as if to say, "Hold." I heard cutlery rattle at the back when the caterers froze. The best man opened and closed his mouth. A fish stranded by lowered water. Mallister lifted a folder, paper corners softened from travel, and waved it as if it were scripture. He forged his records. He lied about his service. He used my sister to climb, she said. People turned their heads away from me and toward her. The phones stayed up. The quartet stopped. The air tasted like lemon and fear. Across the room, my father stood near the exit doors, a hand on the knob. He didn't look surprised. He looked satisfied. He had always believed that what I did in uniform meant less than what he and Mallister did in suits. He had always treated my competence like a rumor. Now he had spectacle. The officiant tried to speak. One MP began to read Daniel his rights. A child cried, the wet hiccup cry that happens when the world stops making sense. I lifted my chin. "Let them verify," I said, keeping my voice low. "No one moves, no one yells." I wasn't giving orders. I was reminding myself to be the person I had promised to be. The east doors blew inward on a gust I felt in my bones. A man filled the threshold in midnight blue service dress, shoulders broad, ribbons like a small flag over his heart, 4 silver stars cut from hard light on his epaulets. General Mallister did not slow. "What are you doing?" he barked, the question slamming into the aisle like a dropped hammer. The MPs straightened in reflex. Their hands left the chain. He turned his head, scanning, until his gaze found Mallister. He didn't raise his voice for the next sentence. He didn't have to. "You just compromised everything." Mallister's color drained as if someone had pulled a sink plug. The phones kept recording. The guests stopped pretending this was a misunderstanding and started realizing it was something else entirely. I took 1 step toward Daniel, close enough that my dress brushed the cuffs. "Breathe," I said. He did. General Mallister looked at me, and in that brief look was the recognition of someone who had watched me inventory fuel bladders in a sandstorm, and medevac a supply sergeant on a runway that wouldn't stop shaking. "Release him," the general said. The word release moved through the room like oxygen. The MPs obeyed. The cuffs fell open with a small, precise click. Someone started to clap and then thought better of it. I could hear a peony petal come loose and land on tile. No one knew what to say. I did not help them. I stood with Daniel, feeling the indentation the bracelets had left around his skin, and I waited for the next thing to declare itself. In my life, the next thing always does. Years later, the line would still ring in my ears. "Arrest him. He's a fake." Cuffs flashing. A 4-star stormed in. "What are you doing? You just compromised everything." My sister went pale. The room remembered breathe. Time stalled so completely I could hear the chandelier hum. The quartet froze, bows midair. Daniel rubbed his wrist once, asking his skin to forget. Eyes bounced between the open cuffs and the 4 silver stars that had just ended the arrest. "Ma'am," one MP said, voice meant for me and heard by everyone. We were acting on a report. I didn't ask whose. The answer was standing 3 paces from the flowers, clutching a folder against a dress that suddenly looked like armor. Melissa's chin stayed up. Her hands trembled. General Mallister's tone was steel wrapped in velvet. There will be no further actions here today. Release him. Clear space for the ceremony. The order landed like oxygen. The cuffs clicked apart with a small, definite mercy. I looked for my father. He had rotated his body into profile, the public pose he uses when he's calculating. Eyes narrowed as if odds improve when seen sideways. He had not moved to me. He had not moved to Daniel. He did not move at all. "Who is he?" a cousin whispered. "4 stars," someone breathed back, as if naming weather. A neighbor muttered, "If there's nothing to hide, why would a general show up?" It was the kind of logic that puts fear in uniform and calls it reason. I kept my hands low and still. Betrayal has a pulse. You feel it in your sternum if you get quiet enough. I got quiet. I let the room arrange itself around the silence. Mallister looked my way. I nodded. He turned to the officiant. "From the top," he said, not unkindly. The officiant surfaced, found his place, and tried to make his voice sound like a beginning instead of a restart. Guests did the only helpful thing. They sat taller and pretended to vanish. We resumed. Not the music. That would take a minute. We resumed the choosing. Daniel's smile had the set he saves for MRI machines. "I'm fine. I'm here. I won't move unless told." He leaned toward me just enough for his shoulder to touch lace. Questions crowded behind my teeth. Which part of the operation had we brushed? How many signatures covered his cover? How many steps would we retrace because today became public? The general caught my eye with a look I understood. Later. Later we make calls. Later we write things down. Later we count who noticed and who only thinks they did. Someone laughed, the wrong sound at the wrong time, and then swallowed it whole. The flower girl began collecting the petals she had scattered, as if repairing the aisle could repair the hour. Her mother smoothed her hair and lied kindly. "It's okay." Melissa did not apologize. She adjusted a bracelet, recovered a smile she believed looked principled, and waited for the room to decide whether she was a guardian or a villain. I knew which story she would tell herself tonight. I also knew something she didn't. The worst damage is often done by people certain they are saving someone. When the quartet lifted bows again, the first notes were thin, then steadied like a plane finding clean air after chop. My heart kept a second rhythm underneath. Assess, contain, secure, proceed. I have lived months by that cadence. I found my father again. He finally met my eyes. I saw a flicker I couldn't read. Pride at a spectacle survived. Irritation at a plan disturbed. Or the old judgment that says, "You invited this by insisting on a life I don't understand." He looked away first. "Shall we?" I said to Daniel. "We shall," his hand answered. The ceremony moved forward. I let the quiet keep working for me, collecting names, marking faces, recording who clapped and who pretended. I did not explain yet. I still trust quiet more than noise. Noise announces what people want you to think. Quiet reveals what they are. 6 months before the ceremony, Peace started wearing a timer. Daniel and I announced our engagement over soup at Melissa's kitchen table. My sister listened the way people listen when they're loading a rebuttal. "You move too fast with men," she said. "You live by checklists. Marriage doesn't." That night I told my father. He didn't sit. He paced the room like he was inspecting a fence. "You're good in the military," he said, pronouncing military like a hallway for muddy boots. "But business and family belong to people who understand people. That's your sister. Don't mistake rank for wisdom." When Melissa missed a tax filing, he called it a learning curve. When I flagged a procurement discrepancy, he called it attitude. Forgiveness was a budget line for my sister and a performance review for me. Daniel met them twice. He listens until people feel listened to. He told my father about flight lines so cold your breath fell as glitter. My father nodded like he was enduring a weather report. "Where did you two meet?" Melissa asked, already suspicious of any answer. "On a runway that wanted to be a river," I said. We didn't explain the diverted cargo, the medevac, or the signature we refused when a vendor tried to turn urgency into profit. Some truths are not for dinner tables. 2 weeks later, Melissa texted, "Are you sure about him?" She sent screenshots, records spliced without context, a forum thread with more heat than light, a name that wasn't Daniel's unless you squinted dishonestly. I asked where she got them. A friend wants to help, she wrote. Tell your friend to stop helping, I wrote back. The wind picked up. Anonymous accounts repeated the same doubts. A voicemail hung up when I answered. An email labeled proof demanded permissions no sane person grants. I didn't open it. Sleep thinned. I invited my father to coffee to reset the ground. He arrived late, ordered for me without asking, and said, "Your sister is owed consideration. She looks out for you." "Or for your balance sheets?" I asked. His mouth made the thin line I've known since childhood. "You're making this adversarial," he said. He had already chosen his corner. At work, I ran drills that had nothing to do with the wedding and everything to do with it. A timeline on the wall, names, dates, a diagram of who benefited if I faltered. I did it at night in an office where the motion sensors forgot me unless I waved. Every family has a piece of furniture that holds more memory than wood. Ours is a cedar chest my grandfather built. Inside, I found my mother's wedding booklet, carrying a faint gardenia and dust. On its back flap she had written, in pencil, "You could miss unless you were a daughter. Be kind to your future." I closed the lid and promised I would be. When invitations went out, Melissa called to say the venue was too public. "Safety," she said, in the tone people use when they mean status. I told her we had security. "You think that uniform solves everything," she said. "No," I answered. "It only gives me practice for when things don't." I wish I could say I saw it coming exactly as it came. The folder, the cuffs, the way a room tilts when certainty leaves. I didn't. I saw a weather front gather beyond the windows and made a list, the way I always do. Candles, seating, flowers, contingency. Believing preparation is a kind of prayer. It is. It just doesn't control the wind. Not always. The room did not recover easily, not even with a 4-star general standing guard at the center. The music stayed silent. Guests stayed upright but uneasy, like they were waiting to learn if they were witnesses at a wedding or at a trial. Mallister's words had carried enough authority to end the arrest, but authority doesn't erase doubt. Authority only silences it long enough for the whisper to reorganize. Melissa clutched the folder tighter, her knuckles pale, her voice searching for higher ground. "I was only trying to protect her," she said, loud enough to reach the back row. "Someone had to. He's been lying to her. I don't want to see my sister tricked into a marriage with a fraud." I turned so everyone could see my face when I answered. Calm, not shaking, not broken. "And you thought humiliating me in front of every guest I invited was the best way to protect me?" I asked. My words were not sharp. They were surgical. The room divided along invisible lines. A few guests nodded at me, faces sympathetic, lips pressed tight as if embarrassed for me, embarrassed for her. But another pocket of voices murmured, "Well, she has a point, and better to stop a mistake now than later." Truth has a way of splintering in public, and everyone wants to stand near the shard they believe cuts the cleanest. The general did not move, but his gaze kept sweeping the rows as though cataloging every expression. Daniel remained by my side, his hands still red from the cuffs, his body composed, but his eyes watching Melissa. My father leaned on the back wall, his arms crossed. He didn't defend her. He didn't defend me. He measured the fallout like a man checking wind direction before striking a match. Melissa's voice softened into something rehearsed, almost trembling. "You all saw it. I had evidence. I didn't want to do this, but when you care about someone, you don't let them walk blindfolded into disaster. Isn't that what family does?" She was speaking to the crowd, not to me. I could feel the weight of those words land differently across the room. An aunt dabbed at her eyes, whispering, "Maybe she meant well." A neighbor shook his head, muttering, "This is no way to mean well." 2 young cousins whispered fiercely, "She's jealous, it's obvious." The disagreement turned the air electric, and once disagreement takes root, it looks for fire. I raised my hand slightly, not to silence, but to hold space. "Melissa," I said, and my voice reached her across the aisle. "You chose spectacle. You chose to shame me first and ask questions later. If you wanted to protect me, you would have come to me quietly, even privately. Instead, you called in soldiers to handcuff a man who has done nothing but serve." Her mouth opened, but I didn't give her room. "You say you wanted to save me. Tell me, was this about me, or was this about proving yourself right?" About proving to our father that once again, you know better than I do. A rustle moved across the pews. Heads turned to look at my father. He stayed expressionless, but silence can be its own confession. The general cleared his throat once, the sound a quiet warning. Enough, he said, low but firm. This is a wedding, not a court. His authority returned the room to its seat. Still, the fracture lines remained visible. Some people stared at Melissa with pity, others with suspicion. And some looked at me as though waiting to see if I would crack. I didn't. I stood straighter. Daniel's hand brushed against mine, his presence saying everything words couldn't. The sting of betrayal was there, heavy in my chest. But I carried it the way I've carried weight before, tightened back, steady breath, eyes forward. What I learned that day is that a family rift doesn't stay hidden once it tastes an audience. It multiplies, it recruits allies, it demands commentary. My wedding became a referendum on who deserved trust. Some people cast their vote for me, others cast it for her. My father cast none at all. And in that space, caught between loyalty and humiliation, I realized Melissa's attack had not ended with the cuffs coming off. It had only changed shape. The crowd would carry her doubt for me, echo it in their kitchens and text messages, spread it like perfume that lingers long after the sprayer leaves the room. I knew then, the real battle was only beginning. The ceremony resumed like a film spliced back together. Frame jump, hiss of silence, then motion that pretended it had never been interrupted. I stood where I had stood before the cuffs, smiled where I was supposed to smile, and let the quartet draw a careful veil of music across the room. Doubt moves like smoke. It finds every seam. From the third row, a guest leaned toward another guest and whispered just loud enough to carry. I heard Daniel isn't who he says he is. The sentence was a paper cut I felt along my forearm. Another head bent, and the rumor folded itself into polite, poisonous silence for the reception. No one looked at me when they said it. They looked at the floor, the program, their phones, anywhere safer than my face. I did not turn to correct them. I was not ready to offer answers that do not belong to me alone. There are things about service that knit two people's lives together in a way that does not photograph well. Some of those knots are legal, some are moral. If you have worn a uniform, you know there are truths you hold until the moment holding them would make the truth smaller, not larger. This was not that moment. General Mallister sensed the temperature the way a pilot senses chop. He moved to the side aisle, posture easy but decisive, and spoke softly to the officiant. Continue. We'll address the rest later. It wasn't a request. The officiant nodded, then recited a line about love enduring all things. Daniel's hands were steady, his vows sober, unornamented. He has always measured words like water, poured only what's needed. I gave mine back with the same economy. If anyone expected a nervous laugh or a theatrical break, they didn't get it. What they got was two professionals doing the one task we could complete under fire. Choose each other and remain still. Stillness looks like agreement to some, like secrecy to others. I could feel judgments tallying themselves in the pews. Later, I would read messages from relatives saying they were concerned for me. Later, I would hear that concern quoted as proof. Today, I kept my eyes on the officiant's hands and the way they trembled less with each sentence. Behind us, the general became a hinge the moment swung on. He spoke to the military police, then to the venue manager, then watched the exits. People quiet themselves when they sense the room already has enough story. Will you, Bridget? The officiant asked, and I said I will with the voice I use for checklists that matter. Doubt, however, is industrious. It sprouted as the percussion of phones resumed. Silent photos, furtive texts, one or two messages slid under tables. Do you think it's true? Are you seeing this? A woman in the back rose and sat again without walking out. I did not supply missing context. I let the absence stand. When a storm is overhead, you do not narrate the thunder while you are still counting the seconds to the flash. You ground the planes. You protect the fuel. You wait. We exchanged rings. The band slid over bone that had been gripped an hour earlier. The room exhaled when the officiant finally pronounced the word, married, as if legality could lock out weather. Legality is a good door. It is not insulation. Applause came in sheets, uneven, grateful, confused. The general shook Daniel's hand last, then mine. Later, he repeated, low enough only I would hear. We'll handle this later. I nodded. Later would be built from files and signatures and timelines. For now, I walked down the aisle with my husband through a corridor of eyes, trying to decide if they had just watched a rescue or a cover-up. I did not help them decide. Some stories earn their truth by surviving the wait. The applause faded in uneven strips, like torn tape barely holding the hour together. Daniel and I stood where the aisle narrowed, rings newly warm against our skin. The quartet tried again. Their bows found a steadier breath, but the notes still sounded like a room relearning how to trust itself. We turned to face the officiant. I felt the weight of looks on my neck. Phones rested low in hands, angled just enough to pretend they were not recording. We spoke our vows anyway. His first. Daniel does not decorate sentences, he sands them smooth. He promised presence without heroics, truth without theater. The words did not rise or fall, they held. When it was my turn, I kept mine the way I keep a checklist. Deliberate, precise, nothing extra. I promised patience with the things that cannot be named, and mercy with the things that can. I saw two guests lower their cameras, because sincerity is awkward to film. From the back wall, my father made no move toward us. He caught Melissa's eye and opened his hand toward the side door, an instruction that used to be reserved for me. She hesitated, then slipped out as if the hallway could give her back the power the general had taken from the room. He stayed where he was, arms folded, approving the exit with a small tilt of his chin. He did not clap. He did not smile. The officiant pronounced the marriage. It felt like a line drawn on wet paper, visible, fragile, trying to dry under scrutiny. We turned and began our walk. Faces broke into performances of happiness that didn't quite reach the eyes. I recognized the choreography. Mouths say congratulations while pupils ask, "What did we just see?" A cousin squeezed my arm a second too long, the way people do when they want to signal solidarity without taking a side. At the reception doorway, a server offered flutes of champagne. Daniel took one glass. I declined. I wanted my hands empty. Empty hands read as calm. Empty hands don't leave prints. The phones kept working. I heard the soft counterfeit shudder of 3 camera apps as we greeted a table of neighbors. One of them spoke for the group. "We're so happy for you both," she said, then added, "and thankful everything was clarified." Her pause did what pauses do, filled itself with speculation. I smiled the way you smile when someone bumps you in a hallway and insists it was the floor's fault. Mallister positioned himself by the parquet floor, talking in low tones with the MPs and the venue manager. When our eyes met, he gave me the smallest nod. Later remains later. The band found a groove, safe rhythm of the evening. Guests began to move, but the gaze followed us like a camera on a track. I kept my posture neutral, my voice low, my steps measured. Every minute became a pocket to store observations. Who avoided Daniel? Who avoided me? Who asked for details with a sympathy that felt like mining? I did not fill the silence with explanations. I let it work on the doubters the way time works on metal, quiet pressure, no announcements. Under my calm, a wire hummed. I could feel it stretched from the aisle to the doorway where my sister had disappeared, and my father had posted himself like a flag. Whatever had been set in motion today had not reached its second act. I could feel an outline I hadn't been shown. I lifted my glass for a toast I didn't drink and listened to the room fail at small talk. When the best man tapped the microphone, feedback stung the air. People laughed too loudly in relief. I did not. I counted exits and faces and paths to later. That is how I know a larger strike was coming. I recognized the quiet it prefers. The reception thinned at last, chairs scraped back, laughter echoing too loudly in a room that had already fractured once. Daniel and I slipped out the side door, escorted by shadows instead of sparklers. I had imagined our first night as husband and wife would begin with quiet relief, 2 people shutting the door on the noise of the world. Instead, I carried the silence of other people's suspicion like a veil no hand could lift. At the hotel, I peeled off the dress, folded it carefully into its box, and sat with bare feet against cold carpet. Daniel came behind me, rested his hands on my shoulders, and said, "We made it through." I wanted to agree. I wanted to let exhaustion write the ending. But my phone vibrated once on the nightstand. A message glared on the screen. "You'll regret marrying him." No name, no number I recognized. Just a sentence sharp enough to cut through the fatigue. Daniel reached for the phone, but I held it back. He read my face instead. "Anonymous cowards," he said. "Don't give them oxygen." His tone was steady, practiced. He had lived under cover. He knew how shadows posture as threats. Still, I felt something colder coil behind the words. It wasn't the tone of a bitter ex or a jealous relative. It had the shape of coordination, short, precise, delivered at the exact hour fatigue lowers defenses. A single spark at the edge of a dry field. I put the phone face down. "It isn't personal," I told him. "It's deliberate." Daniel shook his head. "You're seeing patterns because of today." His calm was not denial. It was hope. He wanted the world to be smaller than I knew it was. But I have spent years charting convoys through hostile terrain, weighing fuel loads against wind shear, learning how to distinguish random static from targeted interference. Tonight's message did not smell random. It carried the same metallic tang as the folder Melissa had waved like scripture. I lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. "They wanted the cuffs, not the proof," I said quietly. "The spectacle is the point. Humiliation first, investigation later. They don't care if the evidence collapses tomorrow. They want the doubt to live forever." Daniel sat beside me, his hand finding mine. "Then we outlast it," he said. He believed endurance was its own shield. I believed endurance was only the first stage of war. The phone vibrated again, then stopped. I didn't look. I already knew what it would say. Threats rarely invent new sentences. They recycle them until the echo feels true. I closed my eyes, but sleep refused. Instead, I saw the hall again. Melissa's raised folder, my father's approving stillness, the way half the guests filmed instead of intervening. The message was proof that the night was not an ending. It was an opening move. Daniel finally drifted, his breathing slow, arm heavy across my waist. I stayed awake. I thought of convoy routes mapped in red pencil, how one broken bridge could reroute an entire battalion. My marriage had become that bridge, and someone had marked it for demolition. At 3 a.m, I opened the curtains. City lights bled into the room, pale and unforgiving. Somewhere out there, someone had pressed send on that message, satisfied that they had planted a seed. Seeds grow in silence. My task would be to decide whether to uproot it in daylight or let it sprout long enough to expose the gardener. I turned back to the bed. Daniel murmured my name, half asleep, and tightened his arm around me. His faith in us was real. Mine was too. But I knew faith alone was never a plan. Faith needed files, timelines, cross-reference signatures. Faith needed vigilance. Our wedding night ended not with champagne or dancing, but with a screen gone dark and a vow I made only to myself. This was not a stray insult. It was a campaign. And campaigns are fought with strategy, not hope. The anonymous message on my wedding night did not come from nowhere. Warnings like that are never born in isolation. They arrive with fingerprints, with a trail someone has already rehearsed. In the sleepless hours that followed, I traced the line backward in my head, because every campaign begins with a planner, and I knew exactly whose voice had seeded Melissa's certainty. Months before the ceremony, Melissa received a folder. She didn't tell me, of course. She showed it to my father first, spreading the papers across his desk like blueprints. He didn't question where they came from. He never questions information that affirms his preferences. The folder bore the hand of a man I already knew, Richard Carter. Carter had once partnered with my father's firm on defense logistics. He was the kind of contractor who always smiled wider than the numbers justified. Daniel and I crossed paths with him when we were reviewing a procurement line for aircraft maintenance kits. Carter's bid was inflated, his safety certifications thin, his timeline impossible. I flagged it, Daniel confirmed. Together we wrote a report that cut his proposal before it reached the final board. Carter lost millions. My father lost face. Because he had lobbied for Carter's inclusion. That was the first time I heard Carter use the phrase my father often aimed at me. Your family doesn't know how to keep hold of a golden opportunity. He said it with a laugh in the corridor, as if repeating my father's judgment would sting less. It stung more. When Carter's name appeared again, this time as the source behind Melissa's sudden conviction, I wasn't surprised. He had motive: money lost, reputation bruised, influence diminished. He had audience: my sister, hungry to prove herself the protector, and my father, eager to see me diminished. And he had timing: a wedding when the balance of joy and vulnerability is sharpest. The dossier he handed Melissa was stitched from scraps: public records, half-truths, misfiled documents, and deliberate alterations. I imagine he told her what he once told my father: "This is your chance to protect your sister, to protect your family's name. Don't let it slip away like she always does." He knew which chords to pluck. My father had been humming them all my life. Melissa confronted me weeks before the wedding with a taste of the file. "Are you sure about him?" she asked, phone glowing between us. A screenshot of a military record with the wrong date, the wrong unit. I looked once and knew it had been doctored. I told her so. She shook her head. "You're blinded. Someone has to see clearly for you." What she didn't understand, or refused to understand, was that Carter had no interest in saving me. He wanted revenge dressed as concern. He wanted my father's favor restored and his contracts reconsidered. He wanted me marked unreliable so the next time I raised an objection to his numbers, the board would hear not an officer's report, but a jealous wife's defense. The folder Melissa carried into my wedding was less about Daniel than it was about me. Discredit the husband, discredit the wife, discredit the wife, silence the officer, restore the pipeline of lucrative deals. The strategy was cruelly elegant. In my mind, I replayed Carter's voice, that lazy drawl. "Your family doesn't know how to keep hold of a golden opportunity." My father had used the same words when I turned down a corporate job to stay in uniform. Melissa echoed them whenever she wanted to remind me that medals don't pay dividends. Now Carter had braided those words into an attack meant to unravel everything I had built. The message on my wedding night was not a stray insult. It was the echo of that same refrain, dressed in digital anonymity but carrying the same rhythm. You don't know how to hold what matters. I understood then that Carter had not just armed my sister with false documents. He had given her a script, and she read it out loud at the altar. The week after our wedding taught me how fast a story outruns facts. By Monday morning, clipped screenshots of the interruption floated across feeds without sound. Captions shouted for them. Siren emojis, broken rings, questions shaped like verdicts. "Did you see the cuffs?" Sources say the groom isn't who he claims. A blog lifted photos and titled its post, "The Wedding That Wasn't." Melissa never named me. She posted a storm over the river with the caption, "Some people choose rain and call it destiny." The next day, a quotation about truth setting sisters free. Then a carousel of signs of manipulation, each vague enough to flatter suspicion. When friends pressed her, she replied with restraint, "I can't share details. Pray for Bridget to see clearly." The performance hurt more than an accusation. It let people imagine their own worst version and call it care. My father stayed silent in public and precise in private. He didn't call. He emailed 2 sentences to a relative who forwarded them to me by accident. "Let's wait for all the facts. The girls are emotional." Girls, as if we had rewound to a decade when my work fit behind Melissa's headshots in his wallet. His silence wasn't neutrality. It was choosing without fingerprints. Daniel vanished from photographs before anyone could crop him out. Operational security requested what I expected: minimize exposure, live small, speak less. He moved like someone walking under glass, careful, measured, leaving no prints. To friends, his absence looked like proof. To our chain of command, it looked like prudence. To me, it felt like building a home in a safe room. I went back to work because logistics officers don't get sabbaticals for scandal. I signed flight authorizations, reconciled inventories, briefed a colonel on fuel allocations for an exercise I cannot name. I wore the same calm I wore at the altar, but now it carried ballast. Most mornings, I parked rows deeper and sat a minute before opening the door, quietly making a list in my head. What I can control, what I must endure, what I will not forgive, because forgiveness would be spent against me later. Rumor aged badly, but refused to die. It settled into internet like silt, impossible to scoop out without muddying the river. Coworkers asked weather questions. How are things? They meant, will this touch us? I answered like weather too. Clearing. At night, I built an archive. I captured Melissa's captions, saved timestamps, printed emails, and labeled a folder with a date I would rather forget. I numbered steps the way I number pallets, because order steadies me when others weaponize ambiguity. I cooked simple, careful food. I ran until my lungs found cadence. I let some friendships swing by their own weight to see which held. Daniel and I spoke in short sentences, not for lack of love, but to keep our discipline. He said, 2 weeks. And I understood an operation had a window. I said, noted. And he knew a line on our timeline had turned from pencil to ink. We walked back streets so we looked like a couple looking at houses, not a case study in fallout. Pressure changed shape depending on the door. Outside, it stiffened my posture. Inside, it hummed along my ribs like a live wire. Sleep came in 90-minute pieces. I dreamed in checklists. I woke to the same sentence daily. You will not be defined by someone else's rumor. Then I made coffee and wrote another list. If survival were the only goal, we had already succeeded. But storms redraw coasts. I felt the shoreline of my life move. What I said, who I trusted, how long I waited before answering a text. That was the price no picture shows. Not shame, not spectacle, only the quiet re-engineering of an ordinary day to protect what matters until later lets truth speak at full volume. I learned early in the Army that evidence is the difference between rumor and report. Paper weighs more than whispers. So when the noise around Daniel and me refused to fade, I decided to build my own record. Not a defense. Records don't defend. They endure. The first night I started small. I opened my laptop, created a folder, and labeled it with a date. I pulled Melissa's cryptic posts from the internet and printed them one by one. Each page slid out of the printer warm, smelling faintly of toner. I set them in a neat stack, clipped them, and wrote by hand the time they appeared online. My handwriting looked steadier than my pulse. By the second night, I had expanded. I searched for mentions of Daniel's name on forums, cross-checked timestamps with when he was deployed or briefed, highlighted words that only someone with partial information could have known. I didn't tell him what I was doing. He already carried enough. This was my lane. I bought a corkboard and carried it into the spare room. I pinned the first sheet at the top left corner. The accusation at our wedding, caught on someone's phone. Beside it, Melissa's posts. Below those, emails from my father's associates, not addressed to me but copied to others. I printed them anyway. Each line of text was a thread, and I intended to weave them until the pattern showed itself. I added color-coded sticky notes, yellow for public statements, blue for private correspondence, red for anything that suggested collusion. Soon the board glowed like a map under infrared. Every day I moved a note an inch, connected two with a string, tested a new hypothesis. The board became the room's only decoration. On my desk, I kept a small recorder. I had carried it during deployments, meant for briefings on the move. Now it captured conversations I didn't trust to memory. A call from a colleague who hinted that Melissa had been fed information. A voicemail from a friend urging me to reconsider Daniel. Each file I transferred, labeled with date and context, then backed up on a drive I hid beneath uniforms in my closet. The act of collecting steadied me. People think gathering evidence means confrontation, but in truth, it feels closer to prayer. Quiet, patient, reverent. Each page I pinned reminded me that I wasn't powerless, even if I couldn't yet speak. Still, the process cut into me. Standing before the wall of paper late at night, I saw not just evidence, but echoes. My sister's voice mid-accusation frozen on screen, mouth open in a shape that looked almost like grief. My father's curt words reduced to black text, lacking warmth but unmistakably his. Carter's name surfacing more than once in obscure threads, attached to language too rehearsed to be coincidence. Some nights I asked myself if I was overbuilding, if by trying to prove Daniel clean, I was confirming to others he might not be. But the soldier in me knew you don't prepare because you expect the worst. You prepare because you refuse to be caught unready. By the end of the week, the spare room had transformed. The wall was covered in paper, string, and ink, a timeline stretching from months before our wedding to the present. At the center was Melissa, not because I hated her, but because her choices marked the visible surface of a deeper campaign. Around her orbited my father, Carter, and a constellation of small remarks, too aligned to be random. When I shut off the light each night, the board lingered in my mind like an afterimage. I carried it into sleep, tracing lines between nodes even with my eyes closed. Evidence is patient. It waits until someone brave enough holds it to the light. And I was ready to be that someone, even if the truth scorched more than the lies ever did. The board filled the spare room. My father's name kept appearing near the center. Evidence narrows choices, and mine now narrowed to a door with his name on frosted glass. I asked for a meeting. He suggested his office after hours, when the building was quiet and the receptionist wouldn't look up from a phone and translate our faces into gossip. I arrived early. The hallway smelled like lemon cleaner and old carpet. Family photos lined the wall. Melissa at a ribbon cutting, my father shaking hands with a donor, a younger me in uniform cropped by the frame so the ribbons didn't show. He kept me in the gallery, but at reduced resolution. He stood when I entered, then sat without offering to shake. "Coffee?" he asked, already pouring 2 cups. He slid one across the desk and said, "You've had a difficult week." "I have," I said. "So has the truth." "There's no need for dramatics," he replied. "Time will settle this if we allow it." "Time won't cross-examine a forged record," I said. "People will." He exhaled through his nose. "You're still reactive, Bridget. Your sister believes she was protecting you." "How long are you going to keep protecting Melissa?" I asked. "How many rooms will you let her burn, if she says it's for my own good?" He placed the cup down carefully, centering it on a coaster, as if alignment could substitute for accountability. "I'm trying to protect the family's reputation." "No reputation survives if it's built on a lie," I answered. "It just looks upright until the weight shifts." "You've always preferred principle to pragmatism," he said. "That's admirable in uniform, less so in business. Richard Carter tells me." I lifted a hand. "Carter is the problem, not the reference. He lost a contract because his numbers were wrong and his safety paperwork thinner than patience. Now he's feeding Melissa stories with my name as garnish." "You don't understand how opportunity works," he said. "Our partners expect flexibility. Your report made us look rigid." "My report made us look honest," I said. "If that costs us people who prefer the other thing, let them go." He leaned back. The chair creaked. A small confession. "You and I see the world differently. Melissa knows how to keep hold of a golden opportunity." "That line sounds better in Carter's mouth," I said. "It keeps his hands clean while yours carry the mess." He flinched, then rearranged his features into indifference. "What is it you want from me? An apology for your sister's overreach? A public statement?" "I want you to stop giving her permission to mistake harm for help," I said. "Say out loud that she was wrong. Tell the relatives who are whispering that you stand with the facts, not the folder. And stop letting Carter through your door." He drummed the desk with 2 fingers. "If I distance us now, it looks like I'm siding with you against her." "It looks like you're siding with the truth," I said. "That used to be nonpartisan." He studied me. "What if the scandal sticks anyway?" he asked softly. "What if the doubt never leaves?" "Then we outlast it," I said. "But we don't help it by pretending neutrality is noble." Silence took the chair beside us. Outside, the cleaning crew's cart squeaked down the corridor. Finally, he reached for a pen, turned it in his fingers, and set it down. "I'll speak to Melissa," he said, "and I'll put Carter on pause." "Not pause," I said. "Stop." He didn't agree, not exactly. "I'll consider your request." He stared at the cup as if answers might rise with steam. I stood. "Consider the cost," I said, "because I'm done subsidizing it." I left the coffee cooling on his desk, the surface flat enough to show a face that looked like his and not at all like him. The letterheads arrived before sunrise, crisp as a verdict. A courier slid 1 envelope under our door, another to my father's office, and a third to my sister's townhouse, where the doorman signed. Subpoenas are not invitations. They are instructions. Richard Carter was ordered to appear. Melissa Kane and Lawrence Kane were named as witnesses. My name sat lower on the page, a party with standing, a soldier with a file. I read mine twice, then set it beside the recorder on my desk. Daniel's eyes searched my face. "It's moving," he said. "Movement is not comfort, only proof." By noon, the story was airborne. A local station led with grainy footage from the wedding and a headline that did not apologize. Military wedding turns into federal probe. An anchor asked a prosecutor whether handcuffs at an altar prejudiced a jury pool. "Everything prejudices something," he said. The segment looped the cuffs, the general, the pause on Melissa's face at compromised. The loop did not include the vows. Reporters harvested quotes the way people harvest gossip: fast, imprecise, hungry. A business blog noted that my father's company had competed with Carter's on defense contracts and wondered whether family dynamics could shadow procurement decisions. A columnist wrote that Melissa's civic vigilance might be misguided but admirable. Comments performed their usual theater: half outrage, half conspiracy, all noise. I called my commanding officer, reported the subpoenas, and logged the media activity. He listened, then said, "You will not engage publicly. You will present facts under oath. Your husband will maintain operational silence," I answered as trained. "Yes, sir." The next envelope went to Melissa's feed. She posted a photo of chamomile tea with the caption, "Sometimes the law needs a nudge. Pray for truth." Her followers applauded her strength. I clipped the post, printed it, and pinned it beneath a red tab marked intent. My father did not post. He called instead. "We've received notices," he said, as if weather had happened to him. "Our counsel believes cooperation is the wisest path." "Cooperation is not optional," I said. He ignored the correction. "This will hurt our name," he added. "It will repair what your silence broke," I answered. He said he would prepare. I believed he would rehearse. Carter surfaced next through a statement to a trade journal. "I have always pursued excellence and compliance," it read, sentences buffed until they reflected nothing. Any suggestions to the contrary are misunderstandings fueled by personal animus. He did not name me. A spokesman added that Carter looked forward to clarifying matters. Clarifying is what men say when they plan to blur. The subpoenas specified dates and rooms with low ceilings. I studied the schedule like an operation order, wrote questions in the margins, and built a thinner, sharper packet from my wall. Timestamps, chain of custody notes, metadata, small facts that do not bend. Daniel tightened our perimeter. He changed routes, varied routines, switched his phone to a mode that made it less useful for friends and more useful for safety. We ran at dawn when halls are empty. He said little about testimony. Silence was his assignment, and he keeps assignments. Media vans parked across from my father's office, antennas lifted like insects. When he stepped onto the sidewalk, microphones bloomed. "Mr. Kane, did your company coordinate with Richard Carter to discredit your son-in-law?" He formed the public half-smile I know too well. "We will cooperate fully," he said. It is a sentence that promises nothing and implies virtue. The clip played at 6, at 10, and again at dawn. At home that night, I slid the subpoenas into my binder. Paper closes easier than a day. I stood in the spare room and traced string from Melissa to Carter to a date circled in ink. The board did not congratulate me. It only waited. Across the hall, Daniel polished his shoes, as if court were inspection and truth a uniform. "Whatever they ask," he said, "we answer inside the rules." "Inside the rules," I repeated. Then I blew out the desk candle, left the wall lit by streetlight, and let the city hum carry me to sleep that wasn't. Morning would come, questions with it. Melissa had always been the type to draw a crowd, even when she wasn't trying. At parties, she was the center orbit, her laugh pulling people closer, her stories lengthening their stays. But after the subpoenas arrived, I started hearing small silences where her name used to be. At my father's office, colleagues shifted topics when she entered. At social gatherings, the friends who once leaned toward her leaned away. It happened slowly, almost politely, like furniture being rearranged when she wasn't looking. I noticed the first real fracture in the cafe near the courthouse. It was a place she had always claimed as hers. Morning coffee, afternoon tea, even late-night desserts when she wanted to be seen. I went there once after a briefing to clear my head. Through the wide front window, I saw her at a corner table, the light falling flat across her face. No companions, no laughter, Just Melissa, with a newspaper folded wide like a shield she couldn't hold steady. The headline stretched in bold: Defense Contractor's Daughter Named in Federal Probe. Her name sat thick in the subheading, inked black against a gray page. Even at a distance, I could see how her lips tightened, how she blinked slower than usual, like she was trying to turn the letters into something else. Two women I recognized, once fixtures at her book club, walked in, spotted her, and chose seats by the door instead of near her. They spoke in whispers over steaming cups, their eyes flicking once toward Melissa and then away, as though acknowledgement might stain them. Melissa didn't look up, but I saw her fingers still on the coffee cup, the small tremor of porcelain against saucer. She used to post every hour. Selfies, captions about faith and loyalty. Little notes to her circle. But in those weeks her feed grew sparse. One post about storms revealing true friends, another about truth being a lonely road. The likes dwindled with each. People were retreating, and the numbers displayed it mercilessly. My father continued to stand near her in public, though his posture gave him away. He walked a half step ahead of her instead of beside. When reporters asked, he said, "My daughters are both strong women, but the law must run its course." Strong was the adjective he chose when distance was safer than defense. Melissa called me once, after midnight. Her voice was thin, stripped of its usual sharpness. "Do you think they believe I meant harm?" she asked. I didn't answer right away. She filled the silence. "I only wanted to protect us. Protect you." "From what?" I finally asked. She hung up before she answered. I kept thinking of her in that cafe, shoulders tucked, her hair pulled back tighter than usual, as if neatness could stand in for certainty. I knew that feeling too well, the isolation that comes when whispers outpace facts. But Melissa's isolation was not born of sacrifice. It was the cost of her choices, compounded now by the glare of headlines she couldn't edit. Even Daniel, usually stoned to the storms around us, remarked once as he scrolled through feeds. "She's losing her shield wall," he said. In military terms, the phrase was precise. Allies stepping away until the flanks were bare. Melissa still had my father, but his support was tactical, not unconditional. The others, the friends who once toasted her birthdays, the colleagues who once cheered her wit, they had begun their quiet retreat. She was left to read her own name in bold, alone with coffee grown cold, while the world decided whether she was a misguided guardian or a willing conspirator. I didn't celebrate her loneliness, but I didn't chase it away either. Some truths require solitude before they take root. And Melissa, for all her certainty, was beginning to learn what it meant to sit in a room where no one rushed to join her. I refused to feed the fire. Every morning, headlines screamed about my marriage, my sister, and the so-called scandal that had turned my wedding into national gossip. Reporters camped outside the gate, their lenses stretched like rifles. Neighbors whispered. Strangers online claimed to know me better than I knew myself. But I stayed silent. I didn't issue statements, didn't grant interviews, didn't write vague posts defending myself. I knew better than to waste ammunition on shadows. Instead, I funneled every ounce of my energy into preparation. If my sister and Carter thought they had me cornered, they had underestimated what silence could mean in the hands of a soldier. Each evening, I cleared a space on my desk. I unfolded folders, stacked depositions, and pinned timelines against the wall. Every line of evidence I collected was handled with the same discipline I once gave to field reports in hostile territory. I approached it not as a wounded bride, but as an officer preparing for deployment. The motif became almost ritualistic. After a day of drilling through files, I would rise, pull my uniform from its hanger, and fold it neatly, creased edges, perfect squares, precision in every movement. It wasn't about wearing it. It was about reminding myself who I was beneath the chaos. Discipline was my armor, order was my weapon. I folded those sleeves as if I were folding resolve into my own chest. Daniel urged me once to defend us publicly, to speak at least one sentence that would cut the rumors in half. But I shook my head. Words now will only make noise, I told him. Evidence will make silence. He nodded, though I saw the tension in his jaw. He hated being sidelined, hated watching me bear the weight, but he trusted my judgment. That trust mattered more to me than the approval of any newspaper. At night, when the noise outside reached its loudest, I trained my mind to stay still. It wasn't easy. Every notification ping, every anonymous message calling me a liar or worse, felt like incoming fire. But I told myself the same thing I had told soldiers under my command. Noise is not the same as danger. Stay low, stay ready. One morning, I looked out the window and saw a cluster of reporters arguing with security. Flashbulbs popped like bursts of gunfire. I didn't flinch. Instead, I turned back to the wall where my notes and evidence stretched like a battle map. The campaign was moving forward. The enemy just didn't know it yet. My father had not called. Melissa had not apologized. Carter had not slowed down his efforts to bury Daniel. And still, I said nothing. Not out of weakness, but because silence in the right hands can be sharper than accusation. Let them underestimate me. Let them mistake my restraint for fear. Inside, I was sharper than I had ever been. Each fold of my uniform reminded me I was not only fighting for a marriage, but for truth itself. If I had to be the quiet soldier at home, then so be it. But when the day came to enter the courtroom, I would not enter as a bride scorned. I would enter as Bridget Kane, officer, strategist, and survivor. That was the choice I made. No sound now, so that the evidence could thunder later. The hearing was held in an auditorium so large it looked less like a courtroom and more like a theater. Rows of wooden benches overflowed with journalists, neighbors, distant relatives, and curious onlookers who had followed every rumor since my wedding day. Flashbulbs exploded when Daniel and I walked in. Though he kept his head low, a shadow of discipline and silence. I steadied my breath. I had been under fire before, but this was a different battlefield. One where perception could be as lethal as bullets. The judge called order, but the murmurs didn't fully die. I felt the heat of hundreds of eyes pressing down on me, each gaze searching for cracks in my composure. Melissa sat a few rows back, dressed in gray as though she were already mourning her own credibility. My father sat beside her, arms crossed, his profile carved into granite. Neither looked at me. Our attorney, a sharp woman named Colleen Price, stood with a presence that commanded attention. She didn't waste words. "Your Honor," she began, "this case is not about family disputes or whispered scandals. It is about a deliberate attempt to destroy a decorated officer's name in order to seize a lucrative defense contract." Gasps rippled across the room. The statement cut through the fog of gossip, anchoring the narrative in something larger than petty family drama. I sat straighter, hands folded, while Colleen advanced to the evidence table. She lifted a thick binder and laid it open before the judge. "These," she said, turning pages with precision, "are email correspondences traced to Mr. Henry Carter, formerly contracted with Lawrence Kane Industries. You will see falsified records of classified deployments, doctored service reviews, and manufactured debts attributed to Captain Daniel Ross. Each of these documents was designed to frame him as untrustworthy, disreputable, and unfit for federal partnership." The screen at the front lit up with enlarged images of the forged files. Some bore clumsy watermarks. Others had metadata that tied directly back to Carter's office. I heard murmurs ripple again, reporters scribbling furiously. Colleen let the silence linger before continuing. The intent was clear. By discrediting Captain Ross, Carter believed he could undermine both his military credibility and his influence in procurement oversight. That would leave the door open for Carter's own proposals, contracts that Captain Ross had previously flagged for fraud and inflated pricing. I watched the judge lean forward, eyebrows narrowing at the evidence. For the first time, I felt the weight shift. The room no longer stared at me with suspicion, but at Carter with dawning recognition. Melissa shifted uncomfortably. Her hand twitched as if she wanted to stand and protest, but she didn't. My father's jaw tightened, his gaze fixed forward as if sheer stubbornness could erase what everyone else could see. Colleen's voice cut cleanly. This was not about protecting family. This was about silencing accountability. My client, Bridget Kane, and her husband became targets because they stood in the way of fraud. That is the truth behind the so-called scandal. A heavy pause followed, broken only by the staccato of reporters' keyboards. For the first time in weeks, I let my shoulders relax a fraction. It wasn't victory yet, but it was the first strike where it mattered most. In the open, under oath, with the public watching. The judge nodded slowly, then gestured for Carter's defense. The battle was far from over, but the shift was undeniable. No matter how Mallister whispered, no matter how my father frowned, the evidence was on the record now. For once, the truth was louder than rumor. When Colleen closed her binder, the judge called the next witness. The name carried weight even before the man appeared: Colonel James Mallister. The air changed when he stepped into view, his uniform immaculate, his posture carved out of discipline. Cameras clicked frantically, knowing every word he was about to say would shift the story again. I had known Mallister for years, but seeing him here reminded me how much authority he carried outside the barracks. He took the oath, then adjusted the microphone with hands steady as stone. When asked to state his role, he didn't hesitate. "I serve as Operations Director for Classified Joint Missions under the Department of Defense," he said. "I was responsible for authorizing Captain Daniel Ross's most recent assignments." That single line sent a current through the room. Daniel had remained silent for weeks under orders, letting doubt accumulate like rust on steel. Now the truth began to surface. Colleen stepped forward, her tone respectful. "Colonel, can you confirm whether Captain Ross was engaged in an active operation at the time of his wedding?" "Yes," Mallister replied firmly. Captain Ross was serving in a classified intelligence-gathering mission that required maintaining his cover. The timing of his arrest, during a private ceremony, was not only procedurally unsound, but directly compromised operational integrity. A wave of gasps broke across the benches. For so long, the whispers painted Daniel as fraudulent, unstable, a liability. Now the revelation reframed him as exactly the opposite. A man trusted enough to work inside the deepest shadows of national defense. Mallister's voice carried no theatrics, only fact. The arrest was conducted without clearance from my office, without coordination with federal security, and in a manner that endangered both the operation and Captain Ross's safety. Whoever orchestrated it either acted recklessly or deliberately sought to sabotage ongoing work critical to our security. I felt my pulse quicken. Those words struck like artillery against Carter's narrative. Mallister stared down at her lap, her face pale, while my father's eyes darted toward the press row, perhaps calculating how fast the story was unraveling. Colleen asked the final question. "Colonel, in your professional judgment, was Captain Ross guilty of the misconduct alleged in Carter's dossier?" Mallister didn't blink. "No. The so-called evidence was fabricated. Captain Ross remains in good standing with the Department of Defense. His service record is not only unblemished, it is commendable. The attempt to stain it represents not truth, but manipulation for profit." Silence thundered through the hall. Every reporter scribbled furiously, some lifting their phones to capture Mallister's testimony word for word. I exhaled slowly, the first true breath of relief I had allowed myself since the ceremony. When Mallister stepped down, he glanced briefly in my direction. His nod was small, almost imperceptible, but it felt like a lifeline. The doubt that had shadowed Daniel and me since that day at the altar was not erased yet, but for the first time, it had been publicly countered by someone beyond reproach. I looked at Daniel beside me. His jaw was tight, but his eyes held a quiet fire, the look of a soldier no longer silenced by rumor. I knew then, the tide had turned. Mallister had been shifting in her seat all morning, her hands clenched so tightly around her purse that the knuckles turned white. When the judge finally called her name, the tension in the room thickened like fog. She rose slowly, almost reluctantly, as if walking toward a spotlight she had once longed for but now dreaded. She sat at the witness table, her eyes flicking toward my father as though searching for a signal. He avoided her gaze, his jaw locked, his posture stiff. The reporters leaned forward, hungry for whatever was about to unravel. At first, Melissa's answers were neat, rehearsed. She repeated Carter's talking points, tried to paint herself as an innocent who merely acted out of concern. But the prosecutor pressed harder, pulling threads one by one. "Mrs. Lawrence, why did you accept Carter's documents at face value when you knew his company had lost a bid Daniel and I had opposed? Why circulate those claims before confirming their validity?" Mallister hesitated, her mouth opening and closing like a gate in the wind. The silence pressed down on her. I thought they were credible. He spoke with such authority, and he told me that Bridget always wanted everything. that if Daniel rose any higher, she would win again. The words landed like a blunt strike. The room rustled with shock. Melissa's voice cracked as she stumbled forward. I was tired of watching her succeed while I became invisible in my own family. Dad admired her discipline. Daniel chose her loyalty. And me? I was left with nothing but empty applause. Carter promised me proof that she wasn't untouchable. That for once, I could be the one ahead. Her confession spilled in uneven bursts, stripped of polish. She wasn't just testifying, she was unraveling. I sat still, my hands folded tightly in my lap, feeling both the sting of betrayal and the hollow echo of her envy. I had suspected resentment for years, but hearing it laid bare, beneath oath, was different. It was raw. The prosecutor asked softly, "And now, Mrs. Lawrence, do you still believe you were ahead?" Melissa's eyes flicked toward me. The heat of shame burned in her cheeks, but she forced herself to face me. For a brief moment, I saw not the rival she had painted herself to be, but the older sister who once braided my hair before my first cadet review. I held her gaze and spoke, not with anger, not with triumph, but with a calm that settled over the room. "So, Melissa, do you feel like you've won now?" The silence that followed was heavy, almost unbearable. Melissa's shoulders collapsed. She whispered, barely audible, "No." No applause came, no sense of victory filled me. Instead, I felt the weight of truth pressing down on both of us. She had gambled the dignity of our family to soothe her own fear of being second. Carter had used her like a pawn, and she had let him. The judge cleared his throat, signaling the examination would move forward. Melissa lowered her head, unable to meet my eyes again. For all the chaos she had stirred, in that instant, she was not an enemy but a hollow figure, undone by her own longing. I sat back, exhaling slowly. Vindication was never as sharp as one imagined. It was duller, heavier. What mattered was not the defeat of a sister, but the exposure of the truth. The judgment came down on a rainy Thursday, the kind of day where the courthouse steps gleamed slick like glass. Carter sat motionless as the verdict was read. Guilty on multiple counts of fraud, conspiracy, and falsifying federal documents. The words echoed through the chamber like steel doors slamming shut. He had tried to cloak his greed in business jargon, dressing betrayal as opportunity. Now the mask was gone. The judge's gavel landed hard, and in that strike I heard the end of his schemes. For me, it wasn't joy. It was confirmation. Confirmation that every late night, piecing together emails, every cautious step through my family's scorn, had led here. Carter's empire crumbled in real time. His name, once stamped across glossy brochures and defense proposals, now appeared in headlines paired with words like fraudster and sentencing. But the impact didn't stop with him. The investigation expanded, pulling threads that led back to my father's company. Lawrence Strategic Systems, the pride of his career, came under the harsh light of federal scrutiny. For years, I had suspected corners were cut, risks buried in the fine print of contracts. Now the inspectors confirmed it. Overbilling, non-compliance. Deals granted through pressure instead of merit. The contracts vanished like sand through open fingers. First one government agency suspended ties, then another terminated entirely. By month's end, the company had lost nearly half its portfolio. I saw my father's face in court that day, stone hard, but with cracks at the edges. He had built his identity on the illusion of untouchable respectability. Now, with each revoked contract, the illusion dissolved. Melissa's outcome was different, yet equally sharp. She was not prosecuted. The court accepted she had acted recklessly rather than criminally, but public opinion handed down its own sentence. The friends who once circled her with admiration drifted away. The invitations dried up. At galas, she became the whispered name people avoided. Her reputation, once gilded by family name and charm, now bore the mark of betrayal. I saw her one morning weeks later, outside a coffee shop near the courthouse. She sat alone by the window, a cup untouched before her. The newspaper on her table carried a headline about Carter's sentencing, her own name bolded in a side column. She didn't notice me pass, or maybe she did and chose not to look up. Her shoulders slumped forward, as if even gravity had given up on her. For me, silence was the choice. I did not issue statements. I did not pose for cameras. When reporters pressed microphones to my lips, I shook my head. My focus stayed on the mission, ensuring Daniel's name was cleared, ensuring the truth lived on paper and not just in memory. Yet in private, the weight of it all sat heavy. Family dinners were non-existent. My father barely spoke to me, trapped between pride and humiliation. Mallister remained a ghost in my periphery, haunting but distant. Victory, if one could call it that, felt cold. Still, I reminded myself of a lesson drilled into me in uniform. Sometimes winning means no one walks away unscathed, but the mission survives. Carter's fraud was exposed. Daniel's integrity was restored. And my family, fractured as it now was, could no longer pretend that reputation was stronger than truth. The gavel had fallen and the dust had settled. But redemption, if it could be found, would not come from a courtroom. It would come from what we each chose to do next. The envelope arrived on an ordinary Tuesday, tucked between a water bill and a catalog. My name was written in Melissa's unmistakable hand, slanted and deliberate. For a moment, I considered leaving it unopened. After a year of silence, I had learned to live without her voice, but something about the weight of the paper, the ink pressed deep into the fibers, urged me to read. Inside was a letter, handwritten, no pretenses, no lawyer's phrasing. Her words were uneven, as though her hand shook while writing. She began with what I never expected, an apology. She admitted she had been consumed by jealousy, afraid of living in my shadow, fearful that I would win, both at work and at home. She wrote that Carter had seemed like a lifeline, offering validation when she felt overlooked. She confessed she ignored the warning signs because believing him gave her a sense of power she had never felt before. She didn't excuse herself. She didn't justify. She simply said she was wrong. She wrote about the loneliness after the scandal, the silence of her so-called friends, the way even walking into a grocery store felt like an indictment. She said she had come to understand that envy corrodes not just relationships, but the person carrying it. And she ended with words I never thought I'd see. I am sorry, Bridget. I betrayed you because I couldn't stand to believe you deserved what I didn't. Please forgive me. I sat with that letter for hours. I read it once, twice, then a third time, each pass peeling away layers of my own anger. Forgiveness is never clean. It's jagged, complicated, full of edges that cut even as they heal. Part of me wanted to tear the letter in half, to send back nothing but silence. Another part, quieter but steadier, recognized what it took for her to write those words. That night, I drafted my reply. My pen moved slowly. Each sentence weighed before it left the page. I told her I had received her apology, and I believed it was sincere. But forgiveness, I explained, was not a gift I could hand over like a medal. It was a path she would have to walk. I set a condition. If she truly wished to make amends, she had to change how she treated people, not just me, but everyone. No more using charm as a weapon, no more measuring her worth against others' failures. She needed to start listening, supporting, and respecting people without calculating what she might gain. I wrote, "You don't need to win against me, Melissa. You need to learn how to stand with others. If you can show that change in your actions, not just in your words, then forgiveness will come, not all at once, but little by little." Before sealing the envelope, I sat with my words. They were not triumphant, not cruel, not dripping with superiority. They were steady, as I had learned to be in uniform. When I dropped the letter into the mailbox the next morning, I felt neither victory nor defeat. I felt release. Whether Melissa would ever truly change, I could not know. But for the first time, the past no longer dictated the future. She had reached out. I had answered. And between us, in ink and paper, lay the possibility of something fragile but real, the beginning of redemption. When I looked back on everything, the arrest at my wedding, the headlines, the courtroom battles, and finally Melissa's letter, I began to see the story differently. For so long, I had framed it as a matter of survival, of clearing Daniel's name, of defending my own integrity against the weight of lies. I thought justice would feel like victory, like standing on the ruins of what had once tried to bury me. But the truth that settled into me was quieter, steadier, This was never just about revenge or proving who was right. It was about forcing the people around me to look at themselves without the shield of excuses. Melissa's confession revealed something I had sensed, but never fully admitted. Envy had hollowed her out long before Carter entered the picture. She saw me not as her sister, but as a rival she could never quite surpass. Carter exploited that fracture, slipping into the cracks with promises of recognition and leverage. What unfolded was not just corruption in contracts or betrayal at a wedding. It was the culmination of years of unspoken comparisons, of a family that had chosen to polish its reputation instead of tending to its wounds. My father's silence had been the clearest wound of all. He thought he was protecting the family name by refusing to confront Melissa. Yet his refusal to speak was what allowed the lie to breathe. When the hearing stripped away the polished veneer, I realized what was left wasn't shame. It was the possibility of honesty. My father had to face that he had traded truth for appearances, and Melissa had to face that her jealousy had cost her not only her allies, but also her dignity. I also had to face something. Carrying the anger, rehearsing the evidence on my walls, preparing as though for war. It had all kept me alive through the storm. But it wasn't where the story could end. If everything closed on revenge alone, then I would be no different than Melissa, measuring worth only through the downfall of another. What mattered more was what followed, the changes people made when the curtain of lies was torn away. So when I thought about the legacy of this chapter, it wasn't that Carter had been convicted, or that my family's company had been shaken, or even that Melissa had lost her prestige. It was that the truth had been spoken publicly, undeniably. It forced people to reckon with what they had chosen to ignore. For Melissa, that meant facing her envy. For my father, it meant realizing that silence is never neutrality. For me, it meant learning that strength is not just about fighting battles, but about knowing when to release the need to win. I often return to one line I wrote in my reply to Melissa. You don't need to win against me. You need to learn how to stand with others. In many ways, that is the story I want to remember. Not the spectacle of a ruined wedding or the sting of betrayal, but the moment when truth became more important than victory. The larger story is not about me triumphing over my sister. It's about what happens when envy, corruption, and silence collide with the immovable weight of truth. It's about showing that even the most carefully constructed facades cannot outlast what is real. And perhaps most of all, it's about how, once the truth is spoken, people are left with a choice, to remain the same or to change. I chose to change. And in that choice, I finally felt free. We live quietly now, Daniel and I. Quiet is not hiding. It is choosing what matters and letting the rest pass by like weather you can watch without standing in the rain. Our apartment faces a line of sycamores that lift their arms every morning as if to salute. We run at dawn. We cook simple meals. Some weekends, we drive out to the airfield and sit at the fence, watching takeoffs carve clean lines into the sky. Neighbors know us as the couple that returns library books on time and keeps the hallway plants watered. That is fine by me. I no longer correct the gossip pages, and the gossip pages no longer correct themselves. The internet will believe whatever earns attention. I spend mine carefully. On a shelf in the bedroom sits a cedar box. Inside, a folded vow card, a dried peony petal, a photo my mother took the week I earned my commission. Whenever the week feels heavier than it should, I open the lid and breathe. Some memories talk softly, but they stand their ground. Every month I sort the papers one last time, then close the binder. Evidence did its work. Carter is a footnote in the ledger of consequences. My father is learning what reputation means without shortcuts. Melissa is doing the harder work of becoming the kind of sister who doesn't need to win to be loved. None of that requires my supervision. Justice is steady when you stop tugging at it. I still keep a checklist by the door. Locks, lights, phone, keys, patience, mercy. The last two did not used to appear on my lists. They do now. Tonight I take my uniform from its hanger. I smooth the fabric with my palms, square the shoulders, fold the sleeves along the old creases. The room is quiet enough to hear the cloth breathe. I fold once more, then lay it in the drawer, warm from my hands. A campaign has ended. There will be others. Life never runs out of storms. But this one is complete. I close the drawer, feel the click settle, and let the silence stand guard. Daniel still keeps odd hours. Operational security doesn't retire. Our lights flick on at 5 and off at 9, and we don't post where we are. On Wednesdays, we play chess at our table with the radio low, letting the pieces say what words don't need. On Saturdays, I mentor ROTC cadets. Teaching logistics is a promise you keep to strangers. The baker downstairs saves the sourdough for us because we return the basket washed. Melissa and I are learning to speak again in sentences that fit on one line. She volunteers twice a week at the community center and brought peonies to the girl who scattered petals at my wedding. My father attends compliance workshops and occasionally listens. Sometimes we all end a call without defending ourselves. That too feels like a beginning, small, unglamorous, real. We like early light. Justice is not always the sound of someone falling. Sometimes it is the quiet after truth sits down and refuses to move. I used to crave the clean victory, the tidy scene where the guilty confess, the crowd applauds, and the hurt evaporates. That ending belongs to fairy tales and campaign speeches. The ending that holds is different. The wrong person has to live with what they did, and the right person learns how to live without needing their apology to keep breathing. If someone you love becomes the one who wounds you, begin with what steadies you. Make your record. Keep your boundaries. Choose the path that lets you sleep. Confront if you must, but do it with paper in your hands and patience in your pocket. You do not have to destroy anyone to save yourself. Stand so firmly in the truth that the lie gets tired first. Strength is not louder than cruelty. It is steadier, and it lasts longer. I learned to separate justice from spectacle. I learned that law can punish, but only character can repair. I learned that families survive not because they never fail each other, but because one person decides to stop throwing fire and start turning on lights. If you are in the middle of the storm, hear this from me. You can make something honest out of the wreckage. It will not be fast. It will be real. Here is the larger lesson I carry. Justice is not an impact. Sometimes it is a mirror. The loud day ends, the headlines fade, and someone is left with their choices. I did not need Melissa to crawl. I needed her to look. I did not need my father to regret. I needed him to stop rewarding shortcuts. We began again in small habits, not speeches. So let me ask you something. If a relative betrayed you, what would you do? Would you answer with noise or with the law? Would you harden or build boundaries that protect your peace without poisoning your heart? Which part of this story echoes in your life? The doubt, the patience, the letter a year later? Your answer matters. It might be the beginning of someone's courage. Before we say goodbye, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee? Or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone with gratitude, and if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel, not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Wherever you are, I hope you carry this story with you. And remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. Take care, and I'll see you in the next story.